Right or act.
How you doing, Jim?
Right or act.
Okay, well, good evening all. Welcome to the growth planning meeting. It's the first one for November. Held it 1 week late than normal because of the election on the 11/2. So hopefully everyone's able to get out there and can now join us. We'll start off as normal with the introduction of members and guests. I'm Dan Saunders, Chair. Janet?
Janet Powell. Hello.
Jim? Fitzgerald?
Jim Fitzgerald, Vice Chair.
Jim McMahon?
James McMahon.
All right. Paul?
Paul Hogan up here in the left corner of the Jeopardy box.
Okay. Liz? Liz Johnson? All right, great. Eli?
Hi all, Eli here, community planner, staff support.
Then our ACE consulting team, Liz?
Liz Durfee, planning consultant.
All right. And Tom?
Tom Morgan.
All right. Mr. Gilliam, I see you're here as well, incognito. Are you there at the moment? All right. Warner will be jumping in and out. Okay. So let's start with, here he is.
Yeah, getting the chicken nuggets ready. So,
All right, there you go.
but yeah, no, I'll be here in the background listening in. So,
Okay.
if you run into something, give me a holler.
All right. So very good. So welcome all. Thanks for the full team here. Good to see everybody. Sorry, I can't show my video. I'll keep working on that during the meeting here. Why don't we start off with the first item? Liz or Tom, you want to kind of lead us through that?
Hey, can I just stop for a second?
Sure.
Do we have any guests? I'm not seeing anybody, which is unusual. I would have, when I go to the full attendee list, I don't see anyone else but us.
Yeah, I don't see anyone but us. Hopefully someone will join and
Okay.
we'll get a chat or two. But thanks for checking, Paul. All right. Liz or Tom, what do you want to take us through the...
Liz, would you like to start it off?
I could do that. What Tom and I talked about doing is we're not going to go back through some of the material that we covered in our last meeting on the future land use chapter, but we'll sort of just dive into the section that we didn't get to covering and then spend some more time on issues that we think will be more interesting. Like
So we're going to have dinner in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes here, okay?
Okay.
Well, that sounds good.
3 minutes.
Is there any for us?
I want a lot.
Oh gosh, did I?
Who doesn't like chicken nuggets? I want chicken nuggets.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Oh, you.
Yeah.
Sounds like Werner serving dinner for us. So thank you, Werner.
Better, actually.
So I think what I'll do is pull up a copy of the most current draft of the future land use chapter. And if you want to follow along, I'm going to be looking at a version without all of the track changes in it, just to make it a little bit easier to read.
Okay.
Is that the one that's current on the website?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Yep. So that'll be current on the website. And if I could have screen sharing capabilities, that would be great. Thank you. No problem. All right, so you should see a document pulled up here. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
You're fine.
That's good.
Great. All right, just a little bit bigger. So we finished off, I believe, talking about the infrastructure section. And if you'll recall, we're sort of reviewing some of the sections on natural resources, past development trends, infrastructure, and sea level rise that we're using as sources of information that are informing the decision about the potential changes to the growth management areas. And then we're also incorporating some topics of interest that came up during the process of preparing the other chapters. So we have and some additional information. We talked about incorporating data from the village parcel studies, which we actually recently received some updated data on housing from one of the consultants that prepared the village parcel analysis. I think it's a town-wide update on housing. Haven't looked at it yet. And so I'm just going to go through sort of quickly some of this information that we have on starting with population and development trends, because we have gone over this information with you in other chapters. This portion of the future land use chapter just sort of aggregates some of the findings from other chapters. So please jump in if you have any questions or want to add any comments or expand the discussion on any area. So without further ado, the population section here just goes over some of the census data. We do have updated just the straight up total population data from the recent decennial census update, but we'll get into data issues later on tonight, I think. We have some information on the population projected population, which we have from a data set that's prepared by the state. And that is an increase by close to 14% between 2018 and 2038. The issues that population increase may affect, such as the future demand on services, emergency response, etc. And a note in here on the larger population that the town does need to account for and think about the seasonal population and tourist population. We don't know how COVID is going to, COVID pandemic, future pandemics are going to change the way where we live and how we live and work. So that's another sort of unknown factor that may drive different development trends and population trends in Kennebunkport and other areas. And we've talked about how desirable a place like Kennebunkport is for various reasons.
Yeah.
We have a summary of housing data, and this is looking at the residential development by zoning district. And you can see the bars, the yellow and the red bars are the more recent data, 2019, 2020. And so you can see that Goose Rocks, Free Enterprise, and Farm and Forest are seeing the most residential development permits. And there are some formatting issues with this chapter, so just bear with us for now. All the track changes in there. So this table looks a little funky, but also just a description of the different zoning districts and how they fall within the growth areas, because that's one of the things that we need to include in this chapter, according to the state regulations, is a description of the different growth areas. And we're going to get into some potential changes to zoning in some of the zoning districts, and that will impact multiple, those zoning districts fall within multiple different growth areas. The next section just summarizes the sort of types of housing units, number of units per structure, and we've incorporated some of the raw data from the workshop polls and the input we received during public input sessions. For example, this question on what types of housing does Kennebunkport need more of? And most people responded smaller homes with 1 to 2 bedrooms. The affordable housing, or the question about what is affordable housing, we talked about this at the last meeting, how the town doesn't have a definition for affordable housing. And we've incorporated a couple different options in here, and I did move this down to the housing section of this document. It was up front earlier. We have summarized the housing needs analysis and assessment, and this is a report I mentioned earlier. Werner just received an update to this report. So we'll take a look at that and see if we need to modify some of this section. But they, Camoin Associates did a more comprehensive study of housing and housing need and demand than that we did within the scope of the comprehensive plan. So this is really great information to be able to incorporate. Moving along, we received some data, thanks to Werner and Eli, on undevelopable, the town-owned land, and also we have some land that is categorized by the assessing department as developable, potentially developable, and likely undevelopable land. And so we incorporated that data into this map here to give you an idea of where there is, where there are existing parcels that don't have, for example, like a dwelling unit or another structure. They're land only, but they are, if they're colored orange, potentially developable. If they're blue, they're potentially developable, but they may have an access or another issue. And if they're yellow, they're likely undevelopable. And they're likely undevelopable for a variety of reasons. It could be due to zoning or wetlands, or a variety of reasons, and we didn't really get into that data, and I'm not sure that the assessing department has sort of the nuances behind that. But that just gives you a picture of the amount of land that is potentially, it's undeveloped now, but potentially developable, or at least the parcels. So we summarized some of that information. If we do end up moving the boundaries or altering the boundaries at all of the growth areas, which you can see here in black, it will kind of re-quantify the numbers and recalculate the numbers for, the acres of undeveloped land, for example. And then this table just summarizes that information. Tom, do you want to take over the next section?
I'd be happy to.
Do you want to do it on your screen, or do you want me to keep my screen up?
Yeah, if you could keep your screen up, Liz. And I'll describe what's the content here. And I'm going to discuss the next 4 pages of this draft. And bear in mind, it is a draft. What we're doing is floating an idea for a proposed zoning change, which is pretty bold. And it may never get past this committee, but maybe you'll like it, maybe you'll embrace it, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll go for something in between. But I think it's an opportunity for one of the more interesting discussions the committee can have on the future of the town. And this particular zoning change would be aimed at the 2 largest zoning districts, farm and forest and free enterprise, which comprise about 70% of the land area in town. And it's probably the least developed part of town. It has the most undisturbed forest and natural resources in the town. But the basis for this proposal is that we heard certain opinions expressed quite strongly by the townspeople. One is they want to preserve natural resources. They want to preserve the small town character of Kennebunkport. And they also want to address the problem of housing being unaffordable for many. So here's what we're about to talk about is an idea that could address all 3 of them, or at least that's the intent. And Liz, could you switch up to the next page, please? So up in the farm and forest now, the minimum lot size is 3 acres. And in free enterprise, it's a little less than 1 acre. And what we'd like the committee to consider is recommending a zoning change that would reduce farm and forest from 3 acres down to 40,000 square feet, a little less than 1. And the idea behind it is well, it's also combined with reducing the size of the lots, the minimum width of the lots. And if you do the two together, there are a couple of benefits. And when we go to the next page, you can see a diagram. Liz, you could swing that up. Out in this part of town where it's largely undeveloped, but eventually it will be, at least in those parcels that are buildable. The current zoning is going to produce lots that look like the one on the right. Well, I can't see it. Yes, thank you, Liz. So, and they're kind of, the house, because the zoning requires a minimum of 3 acres and 100 feet of frontage, the zoning in some cases 200 feet, so the houses are forced to be close to the road. If you altered those dimensions, kept the same lot size, but reduced the width of the frontage, the width of the lot, people would have the option of building the house further away from the road, quite likely right out of sight. So when you're driving down the road, it's going to look the same as it always did, except there'll be a driveway and a mailbox there. But you won't see the houses, not nearly as much as you otherwise would if you stay with the same zoning. So there's an idea we'd like you all to consider and maybe talk about right now. I'd like to hear your initial thoughts on that. You're going to say, well, if you reduce lot size, that means you're going to have more houses, and that's quite possible. But the other thing that's going to go on in the next 10, 20 years is I believe the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust is going to keep on going, doing what they've been doing for the entirety of their existence. They're going to be acquiring more land to preserve up in the farm and forest district. So that's going to offset whatever development you might see up there. And then the final zoning change as part of this proposal is we notice that the setback requirements for single family and duplex are the same, and I couldn't figure out why that might be. So we're suggesting that to make those setbacks uniform. And when we make them uniform, we'll make them a little bit less than they are now in some cases for 2-family houses. So I'd be interested to hear what the committee members have to say. Is reducing the minimum lot size something you would entertain? And you think it's too radical? Do you think it's a great idea? Or you think it's something else?
Yeah, well, when I got my lot, I had to get 3 acres. I think more than that kind of weeds people out from being able to afford it. But I think there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. Not every lot or every piece of property is buildable or developed. So it's fine to try to look at those dimensions, but it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Plus you have the setbacks, there's environmental setbacks as well. You could just drive down in the farm and forest, there's streams, there's certain things. And I like the 1 acre idea, but maybe Warner, what was can you kind of give us some history on why it was proposed to be 3 acres at the time? Is he still here?
Yeah, I can share my experience in other towns and cities. Is typically people think that increasing the minimum lot size is a way to preserve open space. But what they find at the end of the day is they just have big lots with big houses kind of spread apart. It's kind of more suburban, which that suburban look isn't really the same as the traditional small town Maine character that I think.
But what do you mean by small? Give us an example. Like, are you talking like a grid, as opposed to? I know there was some. You mentioned there was, having a cul-de-sac is different in relation to having a grid style housing where
Right. Yeah.
if somebody has 40 acres or 20 or 3 acres, if they decide to do a cul-de-sac, that's their choice. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I wouldn't want to get in a position to say, you got to build a square, because the next person may build a square and then at some point somebody's going to want to put a road in between that,
Yeah, no, I agree, Jim. That's kind of a separate issue. In my mind, it'd be ideal to address all of them, but as a practical matter, properties usually get developed one at a time, so you usually don't end up with that connection. You end up with a cul-de-sac. But the proposal I'm presenting to you tonight is independent of cul-de-sac or grid. This is simply trying to control the character of what gets developed in the future up in farm and forest. Get the houses set back from the road out of sight so you maintain the rural character, at least from the public way as you're driving down the road or walking down the road. The houses won't be so prominent. And I know a lot of people prefer it that way. They prefer to be living further from the road. A lot of people don't like to live right on the road for various reasons. There's the headlights and the noise and all the rest, and they like their privacy. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of just.
I can't see my lights in my undark sky.
That's one of the benefits of making this adjustment is you give people the option of building further from the road without having to buy more land.
Right.
There was one comment in the chat on that from a Kennedy, someone named Mr. Kennedy, saying the house farther off the road can be costly, i.e. longer power trench poles, pole work, site work, not necessarily affordable since you will see this in the construction costs.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. And maybe, I don't know how many extra other people are online, but it may be good to just kind of take one step back and just talk generally about what the standards do when you have these standards. Well, everyone has these standards. But for instance, the minimum lot dimensions, so you could see in this table here, the area that's the minimum lot dimension is not necessarily the size of the lot that you will have or that you have to have, but it's just the smallest size lot that could occur in that district. So if you are, for example, dividing up a large parcel of land, and your minimum lot size is 1 acre and your parcel of land is 10 acres, then you could theoretically fit in 10 new lots. Whereas if your minimum lot size is, 3 acres, you would be able to fit in three new lots in that same amount of space. And you wouldn't necessarily be preserving any more open space. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but just to take a step back and just provide a little bit of context to what the requirements are for. They don't set the exact size, they set minimums. So you could have larger lots. You could have, if your front setback requirement is 20 feet, your house can be 20 feet from the road, or it could be 30 feet from the road.
I think it would be helpful to take these one by one. I think you've suggested like 4 changes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think we're kind of mixing them up, and it makes it difficult to assess them. One is reducing the lot size in forest and farm. The other was maybe changing the shape and the frontage requirement from 100 to 50. Another was these dimensional changes, the ones up on the screen right now. And then there was another suggestion, which we really haven't talked about, but it's in the next paragraph or two, on cluster, maybe requiring cluster zoning if you have large subdivisions. If you were subdividing over some number of acres, you require it as a cluster zone as opposed to, so you don't get the sprawl effect. you preserve much more open space than you would otherwise. On the Tom, on the first one, changing the from 3 acres to 1 acre in farm and forest, I'm not convinced at all that it would really materially affect price. I think a building lot is a building lot in this town, and it's going to get a certain value, whether it's an acre or 2 acres or 3 acres. And that's that, whatever that is going to cost a buyer a certain amount to get in. I don't see a lot costing. I'm just using my. Hi, Dan.
Hey.
We can see you.
You can see, I finally fixed it.
If a lot price is $300,000 today, I can't see it going to 100,000 because it's an acre. I can't see the developer.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the math would divide equally. I mean, down here, Old Clough, I think probably 5 years ago, was 3 acre lot was like 155. But I can't imagine a 1 acre would, you divide that equally. Because I just think the market would dictate it would be a higher price per acre. But
I'm just posing that question to our planners who know this stuff, and Jim, a realtor.
I would rely on the realtor, but it's a point well taken, Paul. I agree it's not going to cost 1/3. It might cost a little bit less, and it's certainly not going to solve your housing challenge by itself.
Right.
I think it also depends if you're looking at property on a lot by lot basis, or if you're looking at like a potential larger development, because if you are able to create, put more houses on one parcel, one lot, subdivide, then you are able to lower the price because your return on investment from that one larger lot has a greater potential.
Who's going to get that value?
Yeah, I agree. I think I kind of agree with Paul. I think if you had a perfect 3 acre lot that you could switch into 3 lots, if you could have sold a 3 acre lot for 300,000, you probably could sell each one of those 1 acres for 150 and make more money. If you had a subdivision out there, I think you'd have a developer come in and put in $700,000 condos for multi-use houses. It's a huge issue with our town because everyone wants to. It's a great thing with our town. A lot of people want to live here. I think the change into the 40,000 acres, I'm not opposed to it, but I think it's not really going to, the 3 things you started this up with, Tom, was that it would preserve natural resources, preserve the small town character, and support affordable housing. That change is really all about will it support affordable housing, and I'm not sure the market would do that. It's not going to change. If we leave it at 3 acres, we're still going to keep what we have. It's not going to change what we have, right? We're going to preserve the land, and we're going to have that rural feel, which is what that is. It's not a village. It's a rural part of our town. The other piece is how do we, if we were to proceed with something like this, and it does drive more building out in the rural area, we don't have infrastructure out there to support it. So then it's all wells and septic systems, which was not what we were trying to drive growth, which was towards what our town infrastructure is. So I do have that concern on doing this.
I would be very concerned about changing it to 1 acres. I think eventually that they would all be built on. And I think we need to keep reminding ourselves of what the residents of the town put in that event in July, of that they want to keep the character and the land. And I think filling every possible square inch with houses is going to not fulfill that request.
Right.
Case in point, we used to live in Connecticut, and the house we bought had been on 6 acres. The previous people were able to split it into 2 3-acre zones, lots that were potentially subdividable into, again, 1-acre lots. And when we sold it to move up here, that's exactly what happened. It was bought by a developer, and there are now 8 houses surrounding this big old beautiful home that, and now they're all on tiny little postage stamps.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what people want in Kennebunkport, especially out in the rural areas.
I mean, the other thing too is like, Liz's example of the 10, 10 acres. If I own 10 acres and I sell the subdivide, I can only sell one lot every 5 years. So unless I went and tried to develop the whole thing all at once, as one homeowner, I wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, you could, but it would take a lifetime to do, and you'd be putting all that in there. But I don't know. I agree with everybody, but I also, it's some families, 1 acre postage, that's all they want. But I don't know.
There's other zones in the town that allow that. But I think
right closer to town, which is the price probably. I mean, Jim could probably attest to this. That price goes up significantly per acre, I'm sure. But so I still want to hear from Warner as to the background on why we came to 3 acres if he gets the opportunity.
Well, Dan probably knows that from the last time around.
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 acres when I joined the board in 2005. They previously actually tried to increase it to 10, which I guess let's speak a little bit towards you. That was the folks that had property out there didn't like that because obviously, if you have 40 acres, having to be able to divide it into 3 acre lots is going to provide you with a nest egg, right? With more value for your property versus 10. So
it also creates a lot of non-conforming lots when you do that.
Sure. I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
we
can
can hear from. Okay, go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, no, I can hop in on this a little bit. So you all have had 3 acre zoning out in farm and forest for many years. I don't believe it was in the first original version of the set, of your land use regs from the early 70s. But it's definitely been around, since, I'm going to say the mid 80s, where you've had a 3 acre requirement, in farm and forest. One of the things that did change, and I'm going to say it was probably in the, mid 80s or 90s, was the change from requiring, well, it used to first be 3 acres just of gross land area. And at some point along the line, it changed to 3 acres of net area, which is fine if you've got 3 acres of, buildable land that's all in kind of one location. But nowadays what we tend to see when folks are creating 3 acre net lots, 3 acres of net area, you're probably in a lot of cases getting closer to 5 acre minimum lot sizes, just as a practical matter. Is what that looks like. I think, there have been numerous, there's been numerous support actually, I think in the current comp plan that talks about, instead of going back to, a gross lot size versus a net acreage calc. That was one of the suggestions in a previous plan. And that would provide, provide potentially a little bit of relief in terms of the sizing. But I think if you're looking at, aesthetics, so aesthetics being one of them, the subdivision regs, for those subdivisions that are in a rural area, does have language, in the regs that talks about having vegetated buffers along town-owned roads, so that you don't tend to have some of the development, that we do have in town where, homes are right directly on, the road, but as far as the market discussion goes, I tend to agree, you drop from 3 acres down to 1 acre. I don't see it changing the affordability piece on the open market. There may be a marginal change, but not anything of any significance that's going to support affordability. Now, if you do want to have,
it's going to be the same.
yeah, I mean, because that's what it's going to, it's going to tag in with the market.
Right.
So, I mean, there are communities that do have allowances that will allow for reductions in lot sizes if you're doing a subdivision that is that's deed restricted as affordable, so that's always suggestive language that could be, in the comp plan, to try to go hand in hand. But I do think one of the other things that could be looked at, and I know we're just talking farm and forest and free enterprise, but would be potential lot size reductions in areas where you've got town water and town sewer. So village residential, maybe for example, instead of a 40,000 in BR, you drop it to 20,000 or 10,000 for sewer and water sites. Is another option that many zoning ordinances and communities have. But your old zoning ordinance, Kennebunkport's, was, it was the thing in the 70s, and I mean, that's, Tom and Liz can, attest to that. It's very typical of what communities kind of came out out the door, where you separated uses and you went from, small in certain areas and bigger in more rural areas. And, but there's a lot of, there's been a lot of thought in terms of getting a little bit more specific in performance standards to try to replicate what it is that folks are looking for, as opposed to the arbitrary numbers that many zoning ordinances have.
Werner, what, all the land across from the school and all the way up the hill there, is that village?
So you're talking right across from Consolidated?
All the undeveloped land where the helicopter used to land and, up the hill, all of that land. Is that?
Yeah. So what you have, so that's village residential.
Okay.
The land across the street from Consolidated there, I mean, that's privately owned.
Right. To me, that would make perfect sense to go to 20,000 square feet, because the rest of the village has small lots. The older housing stock, and the ones right along the road, they all have much smaller lots. So it would seem to me that might be,
I mean, if you were looking at, anytime you have a discussion about expanding sort of the village character, you look at, the reality of it is that you look at the character that people love, right there in the village area, and, you say, wow, what's the average lot size in this area that we love so much? You figure out that average lot size, and, you look at the dimensions, say, all right, well, what are the setbacks like in these areas? And you do an analysis on those, and that's what your performance standards are. It's just oftentimes the numbers scare people whenever they actually see it in a table. But yet visually they look at it and see it and say, wow, this is something that we like. It's that it's that standard that gives walkability and the coziness of a community. But
And really a lot more like a neighborhood. In fact, in the last couple of years, a lot of kids have been moving back in. And it's been really kind of nice on School Street, just before you get down to Dock Square, is, a lot of kids. It's really a lot of fun to have that yelling and screaming and, can somebody help me with my leaves? That type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Shovel my snow. Good luck on that.
I'll come break your leaves.
Anyway, so being market driven, I would say it's the desire of the buyer that really kind of points to most things. So if he even wants to pay a premium for a smaller lot in a zone that'll give him more privacy, he'll probably do it. So.
This is Dan. I have a number of folks that put in the chat. It looks like we have 7 that have joined us, so thank you all. I'll just quickly go through those. We had one where agreed affordable housing is an issue for all property in southern Maine, east of 95. Thank you, Liz. We do not want smaller lots anywhere in town. Totally agree, smaller lots are a bad idea. And then 3 acres gives a better quality of life. I understand there's an issue of limited housing, but switching to 1 acre lots would significantly change the character of the town that you can't get back. So this certainly could potentially change the character of that area, right? We do have smaller lots obviously in our village areas. I guess one of the comments I want to make about our town, and I kind of said this before, is we also are getting a little bit older. We have less volunteer firemen that are, our average age is in the mid-50s. And so, one of the ideas, obviously, when you have a more affordable housing, you can help change that demographics. And hopefully that brings in folks who do want to volunteer in our town. So, sometimes what we have and the way it's designed, it gives you I think a spot in time where it's ideal for us. But we also have to make sure that we're also considering these type of ideas so that we keep the demographics that we had, and we keep that village atmosphere in those locations. We keep the rural in those locations, but not changing ordinances at time can lead to undesired effects, where your demographics get messed up, where you have properties that are being bought by companies to turn around and rent them and lease them versus people that live here year round. So that's why I think it's important that we always look at these ordinances that we have, and obviously our comp plan is part of that, and design the comp plan to allow that flexibility to modify your ordinances to stay in tune with how things are changing really in the marketplace, as Jim talked. If we never change our land use ordinances, our town will change to something that we may not like. At least that's my feeling. I don't know how the rest of the members feel.
Didn't you bring it up as a possibility, Liz, to maybe try something different? It might be worth investigating whether or not you could take a piece of free enterprise or farm and forest and put another label on it and see what transpires. See if there are people that are interested in living that way. And you don't have to do the whole thing. Obviously, 70% of the land is these 2 areas. So,
correct me if I'm wrong. This is also free enterprise, which could mean potentially a business on a 1 acre lot, right?
Right. But
now you set it up.
Yeah. That's the current zoning. That we're not proposing to change that.
Can we write the plan? I don't think we can solve this problem. This is a huge thing to go through for this town, right?
Yeah.
And it would need a lot of, additional thought and more participation, I think. What I would like to do with the comp plan is write it in a way that it is, has built in the flexibility, right? So that if we go through a process, within the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, we find out, what makes sense is we keep the 3 acres, but we're going to recommend that we have some type of, if you put a subdivision in, like you mentioned, for that's going to be deeded for affordable housing, that will allow 1 acre in that area. Or if we do some specific cluster zoning and it meets it's a subdivision and it meets all the requirements to sort of still keep the feel, then maybe we'll allow that. But I think us making that step now, I don't think we've got enough, we haven't done enough discussions in town to put that on here. And I'd be concerned that thing by itself could shut down the whole plan.
I agree with
As
that.
it did in 2005 when they tried to make it bigger. I mean, it's such a, it really requires a lot of discussion. And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Again, I don't think it's time to throw this in right now.
Yeah, and a big blanket change like that in that massive of an area has huge potential consequences. You just haven't.
I wouldn't do the whole area. I would just do a piece of it, see how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could write something like that in, that the comprehensive plan, would support those kind of things in some manner. I don't know how we write that.
If you have
So we have supportive language that if we do an ordinance, try something like that the town wants to do, right? Because they're going to have to pass the ordinance and it goes to vote. Then that the plan supports that.
What's everybody think of Jim's idea? Some language that say we'll explore doing a piece.
I think language saying it's exploratory is better than creating what you got here. I think Dan's right. I think it's gonna set some people calling the town, and poor that young man's gonna have a lot of calls. He thought he had a lot of calls for short-term rentals. He might get along with this.
We could have design our land use ordinances are being designed to try and accomplish a lot of different things, right?
Could be for senior housing. It could be for
exactly, and right, and that the committee is open to adjusting the land use ordinance and zoning requirements to help accommodate those. But that's something that really needs to be, I think, a separate discussion.
Okay. Well, this is a really good input. I can't say I'm surprised that with the concerns I've heard. But I wanted to throw it out there because you can speculate what the committee's going to think, but until you actually put the issue on the table, you don't know for sure. But now we do.
Yeah.
And
I appreciate it.
Yeah. We see in the chat section too. There's some members of the public have weighed in. So.
Right.
It's been a very useful exercise in getting some, kind of a reality check with, what has some following and what doesn't. And Dan, I was very much keeping in mind your point is even if you all love the idea, you still have to educate the townspeople to get it through town meeting.
Right.
Yeah, I think I mean, just in 20 minutes, there have been a number of good suggestions, including 3 that Werner made, that are worth exploring. I think it would be helpful to put into the comprehensive plan, and you set it up perfectly at the beginning, what the dynamic is and what the tension is between the desire and the goal to keep open space and the natural look and feel of the town, with the other challenge of affordable space. And even from reading, reading through this whole thing, I'm reminded that under, the guidance from the state, we have to, what is it, 10%, Liz? We're supposed to be aspirational and put in our plan how we're going to do that. So suggestions like, perhaps you have a density in an area for affordable housing, which could be senior housing, it could be, whatever. It could be starter homes or starter apartments or something. But, and maybe there's a particular place in town that it would work, as opposed to thinking these entire zones, which would, if you did the entire zones for 10 years, you could change the town overnight, subject to the growth permits, of course.
Right.
So I like Dan's suggestion.
Is that most of the land is owned by somebody.
Right, but you have to, all of it's owned by somebody. We're not really talking about town land for the most part.
And if you change it to 1 acre lots, there's going to be a lot of people who own that land who are going to see dollar signs.
It isn't, those are people that live here too. If I owned a 10-acre lot and they said I could build affordable housing, I'd probably build, if I considered an investment property, I might consider building 10 affordable houses,
Sure.
Right. But do we want that out there?
What's that?
Do we want that out there? I think that.
Well, it's private. It's private property though. There's things that get built in other parts that I may not like either, but again, I guess it all depends. It's got to be everybody that, I don't know.
I think there's been so much development occurring here in the last 10 plus years, really fast. And I've heard sort of commentary out and about that it's starting to feel potentially like it could become a Miami of the North. And I know that's not what people want.
Wait, Liz, I don't think that anyone on this committee is trying to do that.
Yeah, no, I know. But if there's X available acres in, say, farm and forest to become 1 acre lots, those will eventually have houses on every single one of those acres.
Yeah.
And then you got Miami sprawl.
No, that's certainly not what we're looking
No,
at.
then you have homes for the elderly.
Yeah,
Then you need the transportation to transport the elderly to downtown. So it's just the whole
I don't know.
of our.
All right. Well, I can see we've generated some good discussion here. What I'm also hearing is that the reduction in lot size is a non-starter.
Yeah, that is. We do have a couple more chats, just so I want to keep these folks engaged, and I appreciate them joining. Typically, small lots are close to or part of areas that have sewer water infrastructure. So changing 1 acre in farm and forest and in the free enterprise zone would be unusual, in quotes. And then someone responded to really my comment about attracting younger folks is that I'm 30 years old with 2 kids and my husband's 33. Both of us work full time and commute up to Portland. We would love to volunteer, but there's very little time in our lives at the moment. It's important we keep working to afford living in town. But what free time we have, it goes to our kids who are working in our house. I wouldn't necessarily assume tracking young people will help with things like the fire department, since times have changed compared to what it was like 20 to 30 years ago. People have longer commutes, time, and need to go further to Portland enforcement for the better paying jobs. Yeah, and I would agree with you, and maybe I should have prefaced just kind of in response to that is we've actually had members in our fire department who were helping our average reduce, and when they got married, they had children, they wanted to find a home, they had to leave Kennebunkport and move to Kennebunk or Arundel, which of course then reversed their response time. So that's kind of where was kind of mentioned. So you're right. I mean, just because we have younger folks in doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have the ability to volunteer because of their own needs at their homes. We've all been there. Someone commented Port Lauderdale.
That was in response to Miami.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. And to Tom, could you please list other towns you have worked with on their comp plans?
Should I do that now? I've worked on a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome to, Tom. Someone asked, so.
Yeah, probably about half the towns in Rockingham County in New Hampshire.
Okay. You did Saco too, right?
We did a zoning rewrite.
Zoning rewrite Saco, that's
Yeah.
right.
But when you do a zoning rewrite, you got to integrate it with the comp plan.
Sure. Okay.
So I guess we can, we got our answer on reducing the lot size.
Yeah.
Ready to move on?
Yes, please.
Lot width, was that do you feel the same about lot width as lot size, or is that something you'd want to entertain?
I'm not sure of the moment. I mean, I think on the setbacks one, I don't understand why they were ever any different. At this point, I think I would just sort of leave the zoning alone and provide flexibility in the comp plan to adjust.
Okay, we can do that. Does the rest of the committee concur with that?
Well, I mean, it's the only reason to change the setbacks are what? To change the building envelope size? Like, that's really it, right? We're gonna
Yes, yeah, it's going to increase. It's going to decrease your presence on the street in case you prefer to have your house further from the road.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. It's probably just a lot to put in at this point.
I will jump in here. Just, there's a question, I think, about the 2-family versus single-family setbacks. And, I don't disagree. I think, Dan, you started to mention it seems somewhat arbitrary. Those differences there. I don't know what the rationale was, with that, with the increased setback on 2-family. Especially since you can do a single family with an accessory, at the single family setbacks. I don't see that as a significant change, but it does. I will tell you, it has. It's created, some potential issues for folks if they ever want to convert. A single to a 2-family, it doesn't offer the flexibility. There's a question of if you don't meet the setbacks for, if you have an existing single and you want to make it a 2, having to meet the setbacks for that it's problematic. So, I think in terms of providing some flexibility for property owners, having the same setbacks would make sense.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's an ordinance change. If we really feel that's important, I mean, you really don't need to put it in the plan. It's almost like it's getting into the weeds.
It is.
That's ordinance versus what this comp plan really should be doing.
Yeah, I mean that is what I would call more of a de minimis type amendment that
And we agreed we were going to put in as a strategy, an action step was to have kind of a joint review of ordinances because we acknowledged when we had that meeting with the planning committee that nobody was really doing it. They didn't really have the time to do it because their schedule was busy. We weren't really doing it. And I think, Werner, it was your suggestion that instead of forming another committee, that we have, a subcommittee that would annually or whenever meet and review and then make recommendations back. I would suggest, and I think that's a great idea, I would add to that we include a member of the Conservation Commission as part of that so that we're fully rounded.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't see any issues with that. I think that makes sense in terms of trying to move things forward. Yeah, to have some kind of a joint venture between the two groups. So yeah, and certainly include the Conservation Commission. I mean, that's not an uncommon venture that that they have some involvement. That is something that you would likely want to have that recommended in the comp plan, since
that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, since their duties are prescribed by the selectmen in the administrative code,
right?
And so, yeah, you'd want to have some supportive language on that piece.
Okay, we can do that. And as Paul mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a fourth suggestion in this part of the chapter, and that is concerning cluster development on large properties. And the idea was to make it mandatory on very large properties. Is that something you want to see in the comp plan or no?
Can you go to that section?
Not really mandatory. But what are the details?
It's not mandatory now, but that would be the suggestion. That'd be it's on page 24 list. So the idea being that with smaller properties, Jim, if you had your 10 acres and you wanted to divide it into 3 lots, you wouldn't have to do cluster, but over a certain property size, the proposal would be to require the developer to go cluster as opposed to conventional. And so my question to you, is that something you'd like to see in the plan or not?
No.
I would ask the question as to what what the end result wants to be. Is it are you looking for that specifically because of an open space question?
Absolutely,
Are you looking at it from I guess that just is the question, because be careful with clustering. I mean, clustering is a great way to preserve larger blocks of open space, but you do wind up with something that just looks visually a little bit different. And so I just point that out. The planning board currently does, in the subregs, it does ask for a review of a cluster. So there is at least a discussion that occurs regarding whether or not a subdivision would work, as a cluster. What we've seen in a couple of instances, or I've seen in different, sketch plans, is that with the type of wetlands that we tend to have in town, on a lot of the remaining land, it's doing a cluster in some cases winds up with greater, the potential for greater wetland impacts than, doing smaller crossings across some of the thinner, wetland areas that we have. It is very, it's very site specific in terms of how you, potentially apply that. But I do think there could be, if you want to encourage someone to do cluster, the current ordinance doesn't give a real great density bonus, for going down that road. So I do think that, if the density bonuses were increased, you would have a better chance of getting more takers on the cluster provisions.
Somebody have an example of a cluster design in the area that, at least for myself can understand.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, Wallace Woods is a good, Wallace Woods was done as a cluster. You had smaller lots. Yeah, they're actually, that's right next to the village parcel. So if you're, right off of North Street, Reed Lane. Yep.
Yeah.
That's
the original village parcel wasn't that originally designed as a cluster?
No, actually,
No, it wasn't?
well,
Okay.
there were some designs out there for, for cluster, but, ultimately, because the design was for either multiplexes or duplexes, so the original CDMK, design for the village parcel would be a good one to look at, again, just as an educational exercise, because the developer originally proposed the clustering of multiplexes, and the ordinance doesn't allow for that. And so there's, there would have been, in that plan, there would have been a significantly higher percentage of open space as part of that. Now that was something that we put it to the voters, and it was shot down, back when that plan was floated around. But that is something that, I think is a worthwhile discussion, that if you're going to do multis or if you're going to do duplexes, whether or not you want to allow for the clustering of those types of units as well as singles.
Yeah.
So, Werner, if I understand you correctly, you're more inclined to recommend density bonuses than mandatory cluster, then, huh?
Yeah, only just because I think that, so much of it depends on the, on the lay of the land, and it, I would say you would want to give some level of flexibility, to the folks doing the design work. And I think, the bonuses, help with that.
Not every lot's buildable. I mean, I agree with Warren. Not every lot's buildable. You're gonna, this ledge and other things that are gonna make it difficult.
Does the rest of the committee inclined to agree with Werner's preference?
Yeah, I don't want that mandatory in there. So, I think the cluster regulation piece again could be something that's dealt with just through an ordinance changes. Because part of the preface of that is the fact that we would have lot sizes of 1 acre versus 3. So we've cut that out. So we really I don't think we need really to address that in here.
Okay.
I think the other one, certainly the build out analysis. I mean, we did do one back as part of the 2012 plan. That probably should be updated, maybe with some new information. But we did have a build out analysis done. We're right, Werner?
Yeah, we did we did the build out. That, I mean, that holds true as long as you have the same lot sizes, and the same sort of assumptions.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you change lots, if you change lot sizes and so forth, then that, that throws all the, throws those numbers off.
Right. So that should be kept up to date as stuff changes. The aquifer protection overlay, I think that probably makes sense. That's something we need to take care of. We've got that little piece of the aquifer that's alongside Biddeford, and they have some things in place that we don't. So we should take a look at that and make sure that we're protecting that water source. And design standards for subdivisions. we don't, the northern part is not treated any different than the other part of the town, right? Werner, from a subdivision reg standpoint.
I think the rationale behind this was that if the lot size was reduced to 1 acre, that you
Okay.
have to develop some design standards to help protect the rural character in the rural areas of town.
Mhm.
But I think we'll probably go back and revise a lot of
Okay.
this portion based on the input that you received, that you gave us, and a lot of new ideas came up, I think, which is great. And I think the feedback we got was slightly softer language about potential zoning changes. And we can definitely incorporate that through, the strategies and the information that we put in this section of the chapter. But I think Paul brought up a good point. When we did have the joint meeting with the planning board, there was a discussion about, the lack of kind of reviewing and taking another hard look at the zoning ordinance. So I guess I would encourage everyone to think about whether there might be changes that you do want mentioned in the comprehensive plan, because this is, your time to include, a reference to maybe you want to do a study to look at the impacts of XYZ changes in the zoning ordinance, so that might encourage a next step.
Right. I don't disagree with that part, right? I don't think the comp plan is the place to set the numbers. I think the comp plan is the place to say, if we have some goals that the town has told us about, and preserving our natural resources, preserving our character, which is always, of course, what does character mean to the person who's saying that, right? It's always different from your viewpoint. And then also preserving, or what can we do to help bring in, change our demographics a bit. I mean, affordable housing, that's the piece that, one of the chats was, what's affordable? That's a great question. What is affordable? There's a lot of different definitions that we float around, and that's one of the things we have in our plan is to come up with a definition for that. But we do all recognize, I think, in the town that, it's very expensive. And as there was comments, you have to have basically double incomes and working a lot to be able to afford to live here. And is that what we want? And I think the answer is no. We want the ability for people to move into this town. Kids move in back home, and live here near their parents and be able to afford to do so in some manner. And so how do we balance all those different dichotomies of goals? And I think we just set this comp plan up to support what may be developed. And I think still driving growth towards your infrastructure is important. And how do we do that? And at the same time, it's a challenge of meeting, so it's not all $1 million homes. Certainly $1 million homes are fine. But, obviously if you're coming in and you're just starting out, you're not going to buy your first home or even your second home, likely, unless you have an incredibly great job as a $1 million home.
Dan, I agree with your comment about the comp plan doesn't have to set any numbers. I think the point Liz was driving at was that if there are some zoning ordinances changes that you want to make, or you think you might want to make, if the zoning ordinance ever gets challenged in court, the plaintiff's lawyer is going to say, well, this ordinance is kind of arbitrary. Where does it connect to your comp plan? Where's the support in the comp plan for this provision? So that's what Liz was referring to. Is keep that in mind. There's this connection that has to be there, and this is your opportunity to throw everything in a comp plan that could possibly support where you might want to go next year or the year after.
Does it have to, Tom? Does it have to? I don't know. I guess I'd be confused by that. I mean,
Well,
that comment kind of confuses me.
All right. Oh, no,
I don't know.
No, that's true.
Don't get it. And you got to be kind of you got to be an attorney most of the time to understand that completely. And fortunately, you guys don't get sued that often. But if you do, your lawyer is going to say, okay, this zoning ordinance is being challenged. They're saying it's kind of out there on its own. It's arbitrary. It's not supported. And that's a vulnerability that you got to keep in mind when you're doing your comp plan. You want to write the comp plan in such a way that you're gonna anticipate this sort of thing the best you can.
Right, but are some things just a suggestion, or are there like a goal but an expectation? I can't imagine, somebody can hold us in court, but it's just we're putting the suggestions forward. I don't know.
Right. It's a comp plan's not going to be challenged in court. It would be your zoning provision.
The zoning provisions.
Yeah.
Right, but you could have in the comp plan, as Dan suggested, you don't have to go all the way and put out numbers.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
But you can put out goals and objectives and talk about the nature of the community and the desire to have a vibrant year-round community, and that, the ordinances should be reviewed and looked at to see whether there is a way to, provide starter homes or rental homes or senior citizen homes, or, without having to say, oh, we're going to go from 3 acres to 1 acre.
Right.
Or,
I'll give you an example I'm talking about. Say you want to, 5 years from now, you realize your wetlands protection provisions in the ordinance are not sufficient. And you say, okay, we got to kind of beef this up a little bit, and you get it through town meeting, and some developer doesn't like that. If you had a comp plan that made no mention of wetlands, you guys would be kind of skating on thin ice.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get us on the other side. We're doing the comp plan now. You got to throw a lot of things in there that will kind of anticipate what kind of defense you might require in the next 10 years.
Sure. So I think like the very final bullet there, right? Have an aquifer protection overlay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what it's going to look like and what the protections need to be.
Right.
For that, but it's in the plan that we should develop that so that we do protect that aquifer in case we ever need it for fresh water.
Perfect example, Dan. And the thing is, if somebody brought you to court over the ordinance, you could point back to the comp plan and say, look, this isn't our comp plan. This is not something we pulled out of thin air at the last minute. We've been thinking about this, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah. So I think, just with the rest of this conversation we've had tonight, which is a good conversation, and I appreciate all the feedback from the folks who join us online. Mm-hmm. We just need to write this in a way that's going to be supportive of what we have currently, right? Because we still got to support this ordinance going forward. And then be supportive of the sort of competing goals that we have of preserving lands, natural resources, the character, and trying to somehow figure out a way to make housing a bit more affordable to get sort of different demographics, or get our demographics back to what it used to be, right? Or is, and keep it there going forward. And that's tough. I would have a hard time buying this town. I bought 20 years ago. To try to buy into this town now would be very difficult. And I'm sure there's other folks online who will watch this or read about this, have that same comment. My kids aren't going to buy a home here. No way. So that's the piece. So how do we do that? How do we make it sound so that your kids can afford to buy here someday? May not be their first home. All of us, we all started in an apartment, you get a condo, and you build your equity. But at some point that they can move in.
So Tom, does some of our other wording where we reference like affordable housing and looking to, what Dan's saying is to, try to get the demographics back to what they are. Does that, bring us to a point where we won't be contested, like the scenarios you're throwing out, and we don't really have to commit to some of these proposals that you put forward?
Well, the bottom line is back in the day, the Supreme Court said that the only reason your zoning ordinance is lawful, constitutional, is because you have a plan to support it. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind, no matter which move you take in the future with the zoning. You got to say, okay, am I going out on a plank here and I don't have any support in the plan? Or is the plan support this?
Mm-hmm. So based on our last 10 years and what we probably have gone through, I don't know, I feel comfortable continuing what we're doing, as opposed to making, looking at this tonight as a proposal and trying to commit to it. I don't think I want to commit to the changes and put these in here.
No, that's fine. I like I said, I'm not a mind reader. We only know for sure what you're going to say when we actually have this conversation, and I think it's been very productive.
Yeah. Say, for instance, Jim, I was just thinking, and please, no one that's listening, that this is not anywhere in any proposal, but if the town decided that, well, hey, you know what we ought to do? We do want to grow. We do think we ought to allow for some more housing development in farm and forest. And we're going to run the sewer line out Log Cabin Road, right to Goose Rocks. Then the infrastructure. Now you've gotten this plan that you can change your growth areas to show that, okay, now that's a growth area. Hey, let's take a look at the ordinance. Do we need to split the zone up? Do we need to make a change in the ordinance? So I think that the comp plan already has that built in, where we, have that overlay zone, which is why I still think we should stay with the overlay zones of their growth area. And if that's what we decided to do as a town, that, hey, you know what, maybe it does make sense that we provide some more housing off Log Cabin and north of that, and we are willing to spend, $10 million and run the sewer line and water out there to do that for whatever purpose, then this comp plan would support that. Our current comp plan would support that, I believe. I'm not an attorney, but I would make a layman's argument that it does.
And I would agree with about 99% of that.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah.
We just have to make sure we got a good lawyer that covers that 1%.
Well, the lawyer's got to turn to you guys and say, hey, how come you forgot to put that in the comp plan?
Well,
Can we move on to another topic?
There's some
Sure.
good comments first that Dan, you can those.
we had a couple more chats. Yeah, while you're doing that, let me just read through what we
Yeah,
may have
definitely.
missed. Back to, there was a 50-foot lot width would make it pretty small envelope. I think when we were talking about clustering, someone popped up Pinnacle Hill as a question mark. I don't know if that was a clustering. Having proper size sidelines helps with good neighbors and wiggle room if there is a mistake in the boundaries. 15 to 20 foot setbacks allow for enough room to grow trees for privacy instead of fences. Someone noted Burrell's Way off of Route 9.
Was that a cluster? Was that what they were referring to?
That possibly. I apologize if I didn't catch that earlier.
Oh.
And then there was a yes agreed with Melinda. What is the best way to submit public comment regarding suggestions to the updated comp plan? Well, this is certainly one way. You can send us emails, and you can go on to our Facebook page. You can go onto our website, the town's website, and there's a link to the 2030 comp plan and a way to submit information that way.
Hey, Paul, what were the other outlets you were suggesting or making sure we made available for the comp plan to review it? A library, I think, or
Yeah, well, someone made that suggestion at the last meeting that we have printed copies available for people who may be watching this on TV but don't have internet.
The library, yeah.
Yeah, to put at the library. So I don't know if that's happened.
Okay. So we can follow up on that.
Yeah, we have 2 libraries and town hall, so maybe a copy at each, or 2 copies at each of the chapters.
All right. We did have shrubs are great sound barriers too. How do you make it affordable for someone under 40 who makes 40 to 70,000 a year to live in town? Great question.
He rents an apartment, which we don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. I mean, there are other methods. With space limited and affordable housing a challenge, I would like to the way that we could be notified when a building is to be demolished, have the option of repurposing the building for housing, office space. The town could determine whether a building is salvageable and used before destroying and offer up on public sale. So I guess that's associated with property we would be taking due to taxes, right? And otherwise, we really wouldn't have any control over what someone's going to do with their property. Please send another chat if I misunderstood that. It would be great.
Go ahead. Sorry.
It would be great to encourage home ownership among Maine residents compared to out-of-state buyers. It's hard to do. I don't disagree. Encouraging existing homeowners in town with infrastructure, water wells, driveways, et cetera, to build an accessory apartment as an affordable way for rents to show up, as Paul was talking to. Not everyone can buy a house, but there are ways for rent to support homeowners and vice versa. Agree with Melinda's comments. Also agree with Melinda. You can email through the project website. So great, thanks Liz for posting that. And also agree with Melinda. So Melinda, if you like your comments. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the comment about the accessory apartments. I think if we're going to make a list of things to be looked at, I think it's worth looking at our accessory apartment ordinance to see whether it's overly restrictive. There are some issues. There are some like you have to have the same front door, or maybe, and the size of it. Like, what would be wrong with having, 150 square foot studio accessory apartment for your mother-in-law or a young worker in the area. So I think it's just worth looking back through that to see whether what's there is as effective as it could be for finding accessible and affordable space, year-round space. I'm talking about.
Can somebody, maybe Warner, just so everybody that's listening here, explain the accessory apartment real quick? Maybe so everybody understands. Maybe for viewers.
Yeah. So accessory apartments are for all practical purposes, they're permitted use that go along with single family homes. They can either be inside, as part of, part of the house, or they can be detached. We do have some numbers that provide for a minimum principal dwelling unit size, and then there's some square footage restrictions for the accessory. And I think part of the thought process with some of the size restrictions on the accessory is so that it was a smaller unit than the primary. Because otherwise it would have, it would basically fall into the category of a two-family. There are, so there's not any of the door restrictions, but that does exist in the two-family design guidelines. There is a requirement that you can't have two front doors basically on the same face. I think the intent of that was, so that you didn't have, like, townhouse type look. So there are also restrictions with accessory, with the accessory apartments, that they're not to be used for, they're not supposed to be used for short-term rentals, so that's intended to since the intent is to try to create year-round housing stock, they're not permitted as short-term rentals. I think that those are the big highlights on that. There is a restriction in the shoreland zone that you have to meet minimum lot size requirements for each dwelling unit in the shoreland zone. That's not something that gets governed by local ordinance. That's something that the state has kind of an overarching requirement for shoreline zoning that we have to comply with. But I think that's the basic gist.
Werner, there's a comment from the public asking why doesn't the town incentivize homeowners to build an accessory apartment? Is that something that's been considered?
Why not incentivize? I guess what would the incentive like?
You don't tax them at 100% if they're going to use it for year-round, affordable housing. What's affordable? But so I spent $50,000 and my assessment goes up by $50,000. Maybe there would be a way not to make it go up 100%. That if they meet the requirements, it goes up for, and maybe they have to certify it every year in some way.
Yeah. Those are good suggestions. I think you'd probably run into some equity issues on that. But those aren't bad suggestions there.
There's another one. Isn't there? Don't you have to be is it that one or the other has to be a full-time resident, or both have to be residents to do an accessory apartment?
Well, they're intended to be used as primary dwelling units, is what they're in. Is what both of them. The two are supposed to be, correct.
But what would be wrong with me? Let's say I didn't live here full time, and I was here however long, but I put an accessory, in my dwelling or next to it or whatever. And that person's full time and I'm not renting short term. And now it's going to be easier to track that. But why would, I might think it's great to have somebody there all year long. And I'm happy to take $800 a month for rent year round and not get the big bucks in the summer because I have stability and I don't have to clean, I don't have all that crap. And I'm providing housing for somebody.
I think if you weren't renting out your main part of the house every week.
No, but I live in Massachusetts, let's say, and I come up in the summer and weekends, but I have someone out in my accessory unit.
Yeah. I personally wouldn't have an issue with it, but if you got to be careful of the unintended consequence where someone buys that piece of property and decides that what I'm going to rent the accessory apartment year round, but rent out my house or rent the house out every week. Right. So then I think it gets away from the spirit of what the accessory apartment is.
True.
That's the part to be worried about.
Making it more affordable to have, your seasonal residents instead of your year-round residents, basically.
Yeah, that'd be what I'm concerned about.
Well, you could restrict it and say you're not allowed to do short-term rentals that's easy enough to do in your primary residence if you have an accessory apartment. We now have a short-term rental regulation ordinance, and regulations have been written. Adding that wouldn't be.
It makes a vacation home more affordable for someone, though.
Right, it pays the taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same
Yeah, we
reason why
said-
people,
Yeah, I think we just have to sort of look that through and make sure that it's going to achieve what we're trying to achieve from a goal, which really Accessory Departments' goal is to try to provide some more housing that is more affordable for people who want to move here and live here. And, you know. And,
yeah, it's a starter home
not
for
something that
somebody.
becomes, yeah, it's something that doesn't become just another opportunity for a business to just buy property in a high value town and rent it out. But like if you were renting, I have no problem with that. If you're not there and you got somebody there at your house all the time, that's you're right. It would be comforting to know that someone's living there in case there's an issue.
Yeah, older people have always done that.
Yeah.
I know people who have rented rooms because they want some,
Sure.
person around to look after mom or whatever.
Yeah. So we got about 20 minutes left. So we should go on to another topic here, Liz, or more on land use, or Tom, that you wanted to cover?
I think we can. I guess we could leave it up to the committee if you want to go through comments on the previous chapters, or if you want to hold off on that and just keep going with a couple other topics tonight. I personally would probably push towards keeping going with future land use. Working on it.
I would say that as well.
And folks have the comments that came in our sort of preliminary response. And so if you have a chance to add to that or, send additional comments, then we'll aggregate all of that. And then when we meet again, we can, go through the list,
Sure.
comments on previous chapters. And that goes to, I think, the public who's here also. Someone asked about commenting, but we are kind of going through chapters and fine-tuning things before we get into, formatting and wrapping up some of those topic chapters that we've discussed for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And send your comments. So I will just let me just move my window and just kind of breeze through a couple other sections, and maybe we'll have time for a little bit more discussion on some topics. So we're jumping out of residential land uses and moving into just sort of a quick summary of non-residential land uses. The area of the parcels that are classified as commercial account for a pretty small portion of the land area of Kennebunkport. But as we talked about in our workshop and in other meetings, you're actually permitted to have a variety of different commercial uses in a number of different zoning districts. We asked for some feedback from residents about land uses that folks who attended our workshop were interested in seeing more of, and we did give them a selective list, so it wasn't an open-ended question, but this is how the responses sort of panned out. So Tom and I looked at adding in a little bit of language to the ordinance so much ordinance talk, to the content to support those land uses that folks were interested in and that have come up throughout the processes of updating this plan. So those include small locally owned businesses that are geared towards serving local residents. We have some suggestions on where different types of uses could be permitted in town, some tweaks to the land use ordinance. I think in the interest of time for now, I'll just say that Tom and I will go back through these sections and make sure that there aren't any very strong recommendations on where uses should and should not be allowed. So I think we got some clear feedback from you that you want to avoid, I don't want to say you want to avoid zoning recommendations, but we want to add flexibility and make sure that we're describing the types of uses that people want to see in different areas, but not necessarily prescribing changes to the ordinance. So, for instance, we've written should. I'm just looking at a sentence here. The land use should be amended to allow, for example, small specialty food stores subject to site plan review, which is your standard practice for allowing a commercial use in the free enterprise zoning district. That's one example of where that type of use, isn't permitted currently. Okay. So instead of should, we could say could, and just make sure that nothing sounds uncomfortable. We have some language about farmers markets, a couple of the locations that folks suggested for a farmers market. Solar farms, this would be larger scale solar than just your average panel that you might put up on your home. There's no regulations for solar arrays, and I think this pops up in a lot of communities. There are folks interested in developing solar farms, partnering with, willing farmers who are able to accommodate solar and continue, their farming. But there aren't regulations currently in the town, and that's something that I think a lot of communities are looking at developing. So it's something that the town should, think about developing, have a conversation about, whether or not solar arrays are a good fit in Kennebunkport, where you'd want them, and what type of standards would be associated with that.
Just real quick from my own curiosity. I mean, I know when I drive by solar arrays, I see them, but is there also a means to have like buildings to start, like transformers or something? I'm being very naive because I don't know, but are there buildings that can be constructed with these as well?
Usually not. Usually you have to be near the right kind of power line, and then it gets fed to the power line. Yeah. They're not, buildings right. Is not a big.
Right, okay. But you're probably talking fencing to keep.
It would be about the size of a dumpster enclosure.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if solar arrays are as far as regulations, and what you're going to see is or a federal level. I mean, what I mean by that is it seems naive to think there's a one wire going up and it's just going right into it, but I'm sure there's some kind of a power grid area that's, probably got a high fence around it, right? No? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd be curious to know that, you know what I mean? I'm thinking like, when I see power lines that meet, there's usually a big open area where there's these scientific looking things, doodads and whatever that are probably very high powered, and you probably don't want somebody walking over to it and
that's what you have. That's why you have design standards, which they're talking about.
Right. My question is that like a state or a federal? And my question was, there's no building, but I just didn't know how big of a footprint that takes, So
the building won't take a big footprint, but if you're, what we're talking about here are solar arrays are like 2, 3, 5, 10 acres size. So that's a big chunk of land, and that's an impact on the immediate neighborhood. So it's something you want to be careful about. If somebody wants to propose it. I think that the two best arguments for allowing the solar farms, one is you send less greenhouse gases into the atmosphere generally. But the other one is when you have a local source of power, you're less vulnerable to some of the power outages that you're experiencing now from generators that are quite distant from Kennebunkport. So the closer you are to the power generator, the less likely you're going to have trouble in transmission. Now, that said, and Paul, you made this comment in the other days. The other thing you got to be careful about with solar farms is you don't want to chop down 5 acres of trees in order to build a solar farm and think you're going to help the environment, because you're really canceling out that greenhouse gas advantage. So you got to put some thought into the siting.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, Tom, when you refer to like say a 5 or 10 acres, we're gonna create a commercial setting. I'm just thinking like a business wants to do the same thing. It's just a different kind of business. Maybe it's not solar, but the question could be, well, wait a minute here. We're allowing 5 to 10 acres to be, put on a commercial setting. Why can't I have a warehouse or something? You know what I mean? So.
Well, yeah, that's a conversation you have to have before you actually, decide what parts of town you want to allow this or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and visually, you do with a solar array, you have, you see the impact of it's a development. It's a type of development.
Yeah.
There could be issues with glare that you need to think about when siting, but that type of use doesn't have the same traffic or noise or potential other impacts of different commercial uses. So it does sort of deserve its own set of standards for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
It's something that's cropping up in a lot of communities because there's growing interest in providing accommodating solar fields, solar farms, whatever you want to call them. But a lot of communities don't currently have regulations for them.
And just to be clear, most of the regs that you're seeing, deal specifically with the visual barrier piece of it. There's some pretty hefty industry standards that govern the actual construction piece of it. But most of it's going to be a visual, or visual performance standards. The other thing with solar that's, I think, it's going to be interesting to kind of watch it because it's relatively new in terms of development and tech. And so there's a lot of discussion about, the decommissioning of these sites, because generally speaking, the industry has come out to say that, these panels have got about a 25-year lifespan to them, and so the question winds up being is what happens after 25 years? And so there's a lot of, discussion going on in terms of making sure that there are funds set aside to properly decommission, this equipment, should it, hit that max lifespan, time frame. So it's going to be interesting to see what, how these things pan out. If as solar gets more efficient, if you wind up with more smaller footprint sites, or if the ones that have been developed just wind up being redeveloped with newer, more efficient technology. The other thing to look at, and CMP has some good mapping for this, is that typically you're only going to see solar along areas where you have 3-phase power available, because otherwise it's not cost effective to try to get it into the grid. If you've got to go too far to get to 3-phase. We do have 3-phase in town in numerous areas. But I think...
Anywhere near my lot?
I'm sorry, what was that, Jim?
Anywhere near my property?
Well, let's put it this way. I mean, the Trolley Museum's got 3-phase.
All right.
I mean...
I can run an extension cord across their property?
If there's ever a property that makes sense for a solar farm, I mean, I think, electric trolleys and solar makes for an interesting combination, but.
Yeah, Jim, I don't know where you live, but there is a map that shows all the 3-phase power in town where it's located.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to add to what Werner just said is about decommissioning, he's right. These panels are going to last 25, 30 years. But the town of York tackled that problem when they adopted their solar provisions in the zoning ordinance. One of the requirements for a solar developer is they have to put aside some money in escrow or a bond to ensure that when the lifespan of that facility ends, so the developer can't just walk away. He has to remove it. That's what the money will guarantee.
Good.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense to have that. My only concern with bonds and escrow set aside is that, it's tough to figure out what it's actually going to cost you 25 years from now, and whether or not that's going to be enough money to do the job the way that it wants to. But I think it is a good step.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if there's money tied up in it, then that's one way to make sure that there's at least some thought been given to decommissioning these locations.
Yeah.
There's some comments, Dan. Do you want to go through those before I keep going?
Yeah, let me. Okay, so it looks like Linda, Robin, and Jen all made good, valid comments. Maybe we need to revisit and look over the restrictions for current residents to add apartments, additional housing into the town. Allow our current residents the ability to help with housing issue. I think we're going to do that. So that's a good comment. Seems you're all more concerned with the people that are moving here than people that are here already trying to find affordable year-round housing. Well, good point. And then maybe we should be more clear on that. It's really for everybody, those who are here and those who are moving here. As I mentioned, we had a couple of folks in the fire department that had to find housing outside of town, which certainly isn't helpful when they're trying to respond to support us in a time of need. Strongly agree with Chip and Jen. Very true, Jen and Chip. Farmers markets are encouraged in town for access to local grown food. This would be nice language, especially since we are thinking of climate initiatives. So that was in quotes. Farmer markets are encouraged in the town for access to locally grown food. So somewhere putting that in our plan. And agreed, Werner, current solar panels are not easy to retire. Cool idea now, but 25 years from now, we could be saying, why did we do that? As you were talking about that, I was also thinking about, many other commercial or industrial or manufacturing type operations that are built and then, it's no longer viable and you're left with a building or something that's vacant. It's a brownfield versus a greenfield. And we really don't address that anymore. Not that that's a major issue in our town.
But the land is not contaminated like a factory that dumped out the back for 50 years. The aluminum is recyclable.
Yeah, so
panels. The land is going to be valuable for something. We're not doing the same thing to the land that that we're used to doing. It's not a brownfield by any means.
That's an excellent point. Solar farms are very easy to remove.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have minimal impact on the land itself. So when it's time to take them away, you take the panels away and you pull the posts out of the ground, and the land is pretty much the same as it was before.
So if you do that anything though, I could remove pavement and then. Yeah. I don't know. I think 10 acres of where you guys were thinking. A business that is going to employ people in our town that could be, say, 2 acres. And they put solar panels on top of their roof, and I think of the incentives with that as well. Employing people in our town, depending on the business. They're on 2 acres as opposed to 10 acres. So
we have a section that just kind of introduces the concept of solar farms here. We talked about it, I think, in the energy chapter also, noting the fact that we understand that you don't want strong recommendations about zoning changes is mention of a solar ordinance, something that you would like considered in this comprehensive plan. We don't have to get into
Sure.
hashing out the details
Yeah.
and the design standards, but sort of just jumping back to what we talked about earlier, if you want a solar ordinance, maybe in the future, and you don't make any mention of sort of wanting that in your comprehensive plan, then you really shouldn't be creating an ordinance down the road for solar, because your ordinance should really reflect your comprehensive plan.
I think, Liz, and just at least to clarify from my standpoint, I have no, if we have a land use ordinance recommendation that we shouldn't do like this, consider putting a land use ordinance in place to support solar farms. I have no problem with that plan. I was more concerned about getting into the weeds of our zoning and our current districts and modifying the actual size acreage within this comp plan,
Right.
more so than anything else. I would consider, even if there are some uses that we have that are conditional, that really make no sense. This, I'm okay with putting that in here. That, and it could be worded in a way that doesn't, you decide to keep it, like in some type of manufacturing, because it makes sense in that zone, fine. But maybe, we put in here a strategy to go through our land use ordinance, our conditional uses, and really take a hard look at that and decide which ones we want to pull out. Do we want to have a hotel in Farm Forest? You can put one in now, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay to have it. Marriott come in and put up a big hotel off of Lock Cabin Road. If it became marketable, this is a place where we want to have folks. One of our advantages, we're way off of Route 1. It's not very convenient to go from the hotel to Portland where they're servicing, so it's unlikely that a Marriott would do that. But if they get into a point where it's a great town for people who are going, they see a lot of rentals, they can make a lot of money during the summer by renting out beautiful, luxurious rooms, they might find the money that's worthwhile financially. And is that what we want in town? So
we got some input from during the joint planning board meeting about, potentially taking another look at the uses that are permitted in farm and forest and free enterprise, because they are such large areas of town, and sometimes people are surprised when there is, commercial use next to them. We didn't hear too much after that from the growth planning committee or the public, so I think that's definitely an area that it deserves some more public input. At another time for sure. So if folks are generally comfortable, we'll leave the solar as a concept that, folks were interested in exploring in here for now.
absolutely.
I think we should, I don't know if this is exactly the right place, but since we're talking about solar farms, we don't really have very much supportive language for real farms. And we have a few left in town, and we'd all be sad if they were gone. And we really don't, we want to protect the fishing industry, looking later on in other non-residential future land. But it would seem that we could agree and should agree to protect and preserve and encourage farming within the town. The town has a rich tradition in that. With farming isn't what it used to be, but you can take an acre of land, as I think Melinda from 5 Acre pointed out to us in a recent letter, that she sublet leases a lot, and you can take an acre and you can do okay. I know there's a guy in Biddeford who has 1 acre and he makes 40 to 50 grand a year growing organic crops in a very small area, very careful, very deliberate, encouraging, multiple plantings in a season. And we, I just, as I read through this, I don't feel like we've done justice to that.
Excellent comment, Paul. Does the rest of the committee agree with that?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, then we will do it.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add that we didn't go through this section today, but I think a big part of looking at where the growth management areas are designated, like where the growth area is designated, is taking a look at your natural resources, including your farmland resources. So that's definitely something that is a huge factor in determining where growth should and shouldn't occur. But to your point, Paul, I don't know off the top of my head which zoning districts farming is permitted in and what types of accessory uses are allowed, such as farm stands that help make farming more viable in different areas of town. So we can definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, I think farming is allowed everywhere but Dock Square.
But are the stands allowed?
Yeah, the stands. I think that's an important piece. The accessories that you just mentioned, Liz, that would support the farming industry or fishing industry. Where are they allowed? And I don't think they're allowed in every
it's difficult with a high price of land to make farming viable.
But if somebody wants to do it, okay, they want to take the risk and they want to do it, or do it just as they love doing it and they want to make a little money on it, that's great. Closer access to food. So
we could revisit the natural resources chapter also, just to make sure that that it's clear that farmland is a desirable land use in Kennebunkport.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. So, any other highlights you want to hit, Liz? We're hitting our witching hour.
Sure. One more thing quickly, just to wrap up this section. It might not be quick though, so we can continue another time if necessary. Mixed use. Building with residential on maybe the second floor, commercial on the first floor, is something that also came up. And the uses are permitted in 4 zoning districts through the conditional use permit process, and then also through a review with the zoning board in the free enterprise zone. I guess one, the feedback that we might be looking for is, one, are you, interested in allowing that type of use, a mixed use structure in other areas of town? And would you consider, there's a different provision for open space for these types of uses on a lot, sort of an added layer. That one way to make that type of use more feasible is to knock back that 60% open space requirement. Because you have some underlying requirements in your zoning district anyways. And typically mixed use buildings are going to provide apartments for folks. They also kind of help create a sort of a vibrant communities, local people nearby to support businesses and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to get into the discussion on that or just think about it more for next time, or if Tom, if you have anything to add.
I was going to say another thing you might consider is the parking requirement. It could be that the parking is the deal killer. What we heard a few meetings ago with the planning board is that there's just not much of it going on, and the question is why.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that was, Warner and I were sort of involved in the residential mixed use. I have no qualms in having that be permitted really in any of the zones. And honestly, I'd forgotten that we had limited it to only a few. The parking piece, I think it was all about making sure that there's parking on site, not on street, because it's so limited, right? The 60%, honestly, I'd have to defer to Werner. I don't recall why we had that listed. But yeah, I think if we need to make some of those adjustments, we can certainly look at that. I think it's a good tool that we put in place, and we certainly could improve upon based on some of the feedback we received.
Yeah, as I recall, I think some of the the percentages had to do with the ability for property owners to kind of keep the proposals somewhat simplified relative to stormwater. I think was part of it. Yeah, and the parking question, that's always a that's always a tough one for folks. And I think what, and that's a much bigger and longer conversation, where you start really getting into, walkability and public transit, and the public transit is just one of those things that we just don't have. And so, I do think there's probably some trend, you can look at some type, I think we could look at certain trends on parking requirements just to see what makes sense and what doesn't. I also do think that there are locations where we have, parking that is likely that's within walking distance that could be sublet. For those types of situations. I mean, the ordinance touches a little bit on, the ability for joint parking whenever when it's in close proximity. But those numbers are really, in my opinion, they're too tight. I think it's within 100 feet. And that's 100 feet isn't really much. That kind of, some joint parking could be expanded out, beyond 100 feet. To allow for some greater flexibility. So, but yeah, I mean, that's, until you kind of get some transit, or, walkability within an area where you would have kind of all the amenities that people need, it gets a little bit tricky.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Is that it for this? Get all the major topics?
I wouldn't go that far, but.
Are we gonna continue to work on? Are we gonna continue to review this document?
Okay. Well, we're meeting in a week, right? So that'd be our next scheduled meeting, be the 16th. I'm okay with continuing this discussion there, and then also getting into reviewing the chapters and the feedback from the chapters. Appreciate Paul's thorough review and submittal, so thank you for that, Paul. Certainly made me look bad, so appreciate it. So I would suggest that we, call it an evening. I think we can we'll take up the minutes next week, Janet. Thank you for sending those in. We can go through the approval process there. Anything else we need to discuss before we entertain a motion to adjourn from Mr. Fitzgerald?
We'll continue to work on this document next time?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
I saw some things up top that I want to talk. Okay.
Yeah. It's an important chapter for sure. So we'll spend a little extra time on that. So let's put that on the agenda for next time, along with the review of the other chapters. And it gives everyone here another week to finish their homework. Does that sound reasonable? All right, Jim?
Seeing that we have too many agenda items to complete tonight, I move that this meeting be adjourned.
All right.
Second.
Thank you all. And thank you for participating from all our folks. Have yourself a safe evening and a good rest of your week.
Thanks,
Everybody.
Jim.
Good
night.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Take care.